welcome to Classroom Connections. Today's guest is a real treat for our viewing audience. He is the State Archaeologist and is named Brian Jones. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Jen.
I'm so glad that you could get here. Could you tell us a little bit about your position and what you do?
Okay, I actually just started the job this year in July. We're almost in the new year. You're probably going to show this in 2015, I assume.
Yes.
So, it was a real treat. This is a job that I've been thinking about for at least a decade. And the prior,
Really?
Yeah. I've been an archaeologist in the region since the early 90s. And because the job has a lot to do with public outreach, communication with the public, and it provides the opportunity to kind of keep track of the archaeology all over the state, it was just something I felt like I was really kind of excited to help to take over.
That's interesting. I'm just going to mention to the producer that I need to have my earphone. Thank you. All the powers that be. Now that's sort of opposite what I would think of an archaeologist. I have an image of an archaeologist out in dirt and mud and elements, not interacting with people. So you just said that you like to interact, and I'm so surprised to hear that, actually.
Well, we are often stuck out in the field in the dirt and mud and working outside of airports with protective gear on and unable to talk to the public. And a lot of the projects that we do are sometimes controlled by people who the contract is being done for, so we're not even supposed to talk to the general public while the work is going on.
Wow.
And part of that reason is so people don't find out about the dig that's happening and come in and, that it gets looted overnight while we're away.
Yes. And that's very interesting, because I had some other people on that were very much involved in archaeology, and my first feeling was, I want to go and see where it is.
Right.
And their answer is, no, you can't come. And I was very hurt. So I understand what you're saying.
And this is exactly the challenge that archaeologists face now. And it's kind of unfortunate that we've been, in a way, forced to be kind of secretive about the work that happens while it's happening, because it has not promoted the public outreach side that really needs to happen so that the general public understands what we do and why it's important, and in fact that it's happening in their own backyards all across Connecticut every day.
Well, the interesting thing is, you wrote some articles that I haven't read the entire 25, 30 pages. I just chose some selected selected pages. And what I found very interesting was I was interested. When I started reading this, it wasn't like, oh my God. I found it very interesting, and it added to my education that I never had. Even as a teacher, I didn't know a lot of these divisions. So I think anything that you do to add to the general knowledge will be very, very helpful. And people who are not involved in education, I think they would find this interesting too.
Yeah, I think it's always been the mission of the state archaeologist, and the prior state archaeologist for 27 years, Nick Bellantoni, did an amazing job reaching out to people. He's well known across the state. It seems to me almost anyone you run into, at least in my world, of course, knows him. And so he really set the stage for that kind of the importance of public outreach. I mean, it's not only important to get the information out to everybody about the importance of Connecticut's past and its heritage from the Native American perspective, the colonial Euro-Americans that arrived, and everybody. But even for the sake of our own field, we need to let people know that it matters, or we're going to stop getting supported. It costs a lot of money. Archaeology is expensive. A lot of it happens because of federal and state regulations and legislation that require work to be done. But especially at the municipal level, for every town in Connecticut, the 169 towns, only about 40 of them have any regulations that protect archaeological sites during smaller scale private development. So sites are destroyed every day.
Yes, I can believe that. Now, to move on, get into this, excuse me, in front of you, what I found was very interesting. What are these objects in front of you? Because if I came upon them and I was talking to Mike, the producer, we would just trample over them.
Right, because these are just bunches of chips of busted up stone. But this to us is gold. So when the archaeologist finds one or two of these little fragments of stone in the ground, they have a particular shape. First of all, it's very thin. It's still very sharp. This is a chert, one of the clues, if you find this in this area, you know it's an artifact right away because the raw material doesn't even come from the state. This piece probably came from eastern New York State, was imported all the way here by Native Americans. So the raw material gives it away. And then there's a lot of characteristics of its shape and form that tell me right away that this is debris from making stone tools. So this is the waste material, the garbage.
And that's so interesting because when I saw this, I thought, well, I know where I can get you a bunch of them.
Right,
yeah.
right.
I can just go get them for save you some time.
My driveway is covered in these.
Yes.
So, and here, for example, one of the most common raw materials used in Connecticut, because we didn't have really nice sources of chert, which is a flinty material, was quartz. And quartz is really hard to work, but Native Americans in this area were extremely competent and skilled workers in quartz. Actually, we have a bunch of little quartz artifacts, if I can reach over and grab them.
Absolutely.
It's a tough material. Yeah, go ahead and grab those. So the typical product of quartz manufacturing, this guy's actually quartzite, a very similar stone, were these little, what we call narrow-stemmed points. Most of these are made about 4,000 years ago.
Narrow-stemmed points.
We call them narrow-stemmed points. So they're narrow, and they have a little stem at the base.
Yes.
And these would have been spear tips. Probably not bow and arrow tips, but spear tips. Some have argued they used them in the bow and arrow. I think most archaeologists across the United States don't believe the bow and arrow was used here until about 500 AD, and these date to about 4,000 years ago. So they should predate the use of the bow and arrow, even though they're very tiny.
They are tiny.
Little dart tips.
They are tiny, but then I bet they do the trick.
They do the trick. Yeah. You just have to make a hole.
Yes.
And in fact, they're disposable. They could probably make these in a couple of minutes, and they may well have been intended to break in the animal, causing more severe damage as it ran away, usually for deer, most likely. And they would often break after one use anyway, even if you missed. So they were some of the first sort of disposable tools made by people in this region, probably.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yep.
Now, before you brought some slides, which I'm really grateful for, but before we get into that, people call your office a lot for things like this. They get very, very excited. I'm just going to point out there's some teeth right here that you might see.
Yep.
To me, this looks like a lobster claw. I'm just saying. I know it's not. But they get excited. I'm going to let you hold it. And then they find things like this.
Yep.
So what do you say when people call with these items?
Well, what they assume is they've probably found the evidence of a mastodon or maybe a giant human being, right? This is really large for me. But
yes, that's what it is.
I've proven we have giants. But in this case, we're looking probably at a really large pig jaw. And this one is the scapula or shoulder blade bone on a cow. And this stuff is all over the place because for 300 years, Europeans have been out here making meat at home, unlike the way we do it now. We buy it not even from a butcher shop anymore, but the supermarket. So one of the things that gives away that this is not a mastodon bone is this very nice saw mark right across the bottom. So if you see the saw mark, you know you're dealing with historic period bone.
Oh, you know what? I didn't even notice that.
Yep. So that's one of the giveaways. Even this nice shoulder blade has been sawn perfectly straight right here.
Oh, right? I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
I shouldn't tell you that.
So there's a great rib bone. And the rib, too. Sawn or cut with a cleaver. Either way, perfect straight marks.
I bet people are disappointed when they hear this.
No, they're a little sad. And they often bring really nice rocks, and they fit nicely in their hand. This had to be a tool. And a lot of the time, they're rocks. And they don't want to hear that.
No, they don't want to hear it. I've been telling you ever since I met you, I hope this goes home with you. I love this. I absolutely love this. I'm just going to show it to the audience. This feels so nice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to appreciate that in the pictures.
It really is, and it's a nice coloring, and there's 2 holes in here. So could you describe what this is?
The artifact is called a Gorget. It's made out of slate. Again, slate is not a material common to Connecticut, so that material may have come from eastern Massachusetts. Why
are you taking it?
I don't trust.
Okay, I don't blame you.
It's going to disappear. It is absolutely beautifully polished.
It is.
Slate is a nice material to work. It comes off in these nice flat sheets. You can kind of break it up and get a nice thin piece out of it easily. And it's not too hard to even carve it down with a simple stone tool. But these are beautifully made and then afterwards really well polished. There's little tiny holes done with a drill. They would have been drilled with a tool like this, little stone drill. Okay, I'm not going to touch it because that'll wreck it, but that was the idea, is you could use a stone drill just like that. And there's still a lot of argument about what these were used for. They're called gorgets because it's thought that they were gorgeous gorgets. They thought they might be worn around the neck like this, maybe as a sign of rank or status. More likely, though, they're weights for spear throwers. Here, if you'll hold that for me again, I'll grab that. Here's a spear thrower. How about we jump to this?
Okay.
So here's a spear thrower. This was the traditional hunting tool used before the bow and arrow, all around the world. Pretty much before people had bows and arrows, they used these spear throwers or atlatls. This one has been fitted. This is a reproduction. It's been fitted with a stone counterweight. These are held in the hand like this, and the spear is attached to this hook, and you throw it like that. Okay?
Yes. They have an asset. And
yes.
They have, and they allow you to try some of these things. And I recommend anybody, they're having a festival come up this summer, and they have them all the time actually, to try
and
that.
I think in October is their big.
Yes.
Because they have a big competition. So people compete in the art of spear throwing, internationally, by the way, too. I was studied in Germany, and there, people also, they were coming all the way from Belgium and everywhere else to come and.
So this would be used underneath here.
It's likely that something like this with these holes would have been fastened in the place of that round stone. And there's some very elaborate ones. This one probably dates to about 2,000 years ago. Prior to that time, they actually drilled through these stones and somehow fitted them into the wooden handles. A much more complex form than this. Even though this is absolutely beautiful, those drilled pieces, which sadly I don't have an example of with me today.
That's a natural
quite remarkable.
hole in there. That's a
No, these are made.
But I mean, that's a hole made with something like this. You didn't do this 5 or 6 years ago with.
No, they drilled these out themselves, and you can tell because they're slightly kind of conical in form. They're not a perfectly drill bit-like hole.
Okay,
so we can tell the difference.
To my eye, they look perfect.
But they're awfully nice, partly because it's such a thin material.
Oh, okay.
But if you look closely, you'll see they kind of expand out, and they're often done from two sides. So something this thin didn't really need to be. Like when they drilled out pipes, they had to go deeply through the material.
Yes.
So
very. Oh, you trust me.
I'll let you play with it again.
What I'd like to do now is go to the slides. If Mike could, and you can talk about what we're seeing with the slides. So this is our first slide up.
All right, so one of the fun parts about this job is I do actually get to go out in the field still, which is nice. And frankly, I had been in the field of cultural resource management for a long time, and that's a fancy way of saying contract archaeology. Most of the archaeology that happens in the country is contract-based archaeology right now.
So contract archaeology is where, explain, a firm hires you?
Yeah, often an engineering firm will hire archaeologists so they can comply with regulations either at the federal or state level to ensure that there are no archaeological sites in your area, or if they're there, that maybe they're not significant enough to worry about, or if they are significant, then they'll work with the engineers to work around the sites, or they'll actually put the money out to have them excavated.
So I just want to confirm something. So they're going to be building something here, and you're on site as they're excavating the land.
Well, ideally, we're there 3 or 5 years ahead of time in case something really important happens. Because if you find something complicated, it could take a little while to get it out of the ground. So the more planning, the better. However, it hardly ever happens that way. So
I'm thinking, because I used to be in politics here in Brantford on the RTM, and I'm thinking that never came up when they're talking about development. Oh, that's very interesting.
And again, at the town level, there often aren't even regulations in place to protect sites. So for subdivisions or big box constructions, it often just happens and stuff gets bulldozed.
Okay, so then the next slide.
Okay, so what we were looking at there was working Glastonbury. What we see are features. This is in a floodplain setting, so the soils are extremely fine, alluvium, really fine silty soils, beautiful to excavate in. And what you see is a cut through the center of one of these cooking features. I would call it an earth oven. At the bottom, you see the remnants of charcoal, and it's got layers of lighter soil that have filled in, and then some additional layers of charcoal that probably eroded into this pit once it was open. But what these are probably are ovens for roasting probably things like wetland tubers, cattail roots, or water lily roots and things like that.
I have to say, once again, when I look at that, I would just walk over that. I wouldn't even think of give it a second thought, actually.
Right. And in this case, we were lucky that the gentleman who reported these to my office was familiar enough with archaeology happening in his area because he'd been working with the prior state archaeologists for decades. He knew what to look for, and at this construction site, reported it to us, and we were able to get in there in Glastonbury.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, yeah.
That's amazing.
That's, again, why it's so important to have the public aware and understand what maybe to keep their eyes out for.
And be interested enough to do that, because I could really see this slowing down any project.
Yeah, and luckily in this case we were able to cooperate with the town. They gave us about a week without any interruption to just get everything kind of figured out and sorted out. And after that we worked out a schedule where they could kind of continue to work and we were out of their way and continue with our work, and it worked quite smoothly.
Oh,
so
good.
It was a great
Good.
example of cooperation.
So then the next slide?
Yep. All right, so we're looking at more of these features. Some you see are more charcoal rich than others. Some have a little bit of burnt stone sticking out of the wall there. We haven't run radiocarbon dates on these yet, but I'm expecting they are between 4,500 and 3,500 years old. Basically, cooking like this happened before pottery was very common. And pottery isn't introduced into the region until about 3,000 years ago.
Okay, the next one?
We may get kind of redundant pictures. Let's see.
No, that's okay.
This is the other side of the site. They were putting in a big drainage ditch, and here the lumpy stuff on the surface is burnt stone, and you can kind of see a brown stain in the lighter colored soils. As this was cleared up, it became the corner of a rectangular shape that I think might have been a house floor. Probably, based on the artifacts, were essentially identical to these little narrow-stemmed quartz points we were looking at. Probably dates to about 4,200 years ago.
Now, speaking of the artifacts and some shards that and you use the word in one of your articles, find spots. Is that what we just look at? Would that be a find spot?
Yeah, it's a kind of generic. Often it's something on the surface might be considered a find spot or a single artifact. I would call this a site. This is a full-blown site. And in fact, it was just a window into what's out, probably spread over the whole floodplain. So this excavation just opened a small window into what's happening all over this area.
I see. So that wouldn't be a... And then I also have a note here, low-density artifact scatters. And is that what I have in front of me?
Well, if you find just a couple flakes like this is the thing. When archaeologists are looking for sites and they dig test pits, one little 50 centimeter or 2 foot by 2 foot square every 50 feet, or 15 meters, we work in meters. You know, if they find one flake, it doesn't seem like much. But when you're testing at such a narrow margin, in other words, you've got such room between these little tiny test pits, you'd really better keep looking because these things don't just tend to fall from the sky. So it probably suggests you're near a site. And usually what we do is dig array pits, we call them, around that location. And if we start finding dozens more, then we know we're on something. We better start looking more closely.
Now, the people that... You don't go out there alone. You go out with people.
Usually there's a team.
And are these people trained archaeologists or interns or volunteers or what? Who are they?
Usually in the contract world, these guys have been through at least undergrad training. They've got a degree in anthropology with a focus in archaeology. They've done an archaeological field school. And often they'll go on to get master's degrees. If they want to lead an excavation, they have at least a master's degree. If they're crazy like me, they'll get a PhD. And if they want to, that way they can run their own company maybe, something I would never dare do. It's a lot of paperwork. Or if they're very, very lucky, get a teaching position. Very hard to come by these days in the field.
Well, I would imagine. Now, if someone wanted to... Because the very interesting thing about doing Classroom Connections is I'm exposed to things I would never do on my own. Because I meet somebody and an idea grows and it's like, oh, isn't that interesting? And it keeps on growing. And I have to say, this is one of those things. I never thought I would even be remotely interested in this field. But I'm finding it fascinating. And if this is true of somebody who's watching, how could they get involved?
Well, one of the best ways is to look up the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology. That's my friends organization, a group that's been around long before I was in the seat. They provide opportunities for excavations, in part to help my office. They do a lot of cataloging and other work like that for me as well, even record keeping and management of a library.
Very necessary.
A lot of opportunities there. We will also run field schools that they can be involved in, and the natural History Museum runs its own one-week adult field school for people who would like to sign up for that as well, usually probably in August.
And a field school is where they out in the field working.
Yep. And we had a slide somewhere in there too of
we'll show that.
some of the women who joined us last summer working on a small 18th century, early 19th century historical site.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, going back to the slides then, Mike. Or we can look at me.
Yeah. All right, there we are in the recovery. You get a little bit of a sense that this is a kind of a construction site. The total station, that's mine, is set up in the background, and you see a bunch of the volunteers. Now, I'm going to say that I am an office of one, so everybody you see in the pictures working are the FOSA, Friends of the State Archaeologist volunteer.
Go back to the Sanders picture, Mike, for a minute.
So without them, I couldn't have done this. Now,
is that you in the foreground?
That's me in the foreground in my sweatshirt, just kneeling down, scraping slowly to clean up those features. In this case, because the construction was happening under an Army Corps permit, we were able to convince the town to hire an archaeologist, a contract archaeologist, to finish the work. Just because my office really is not in a position to, do this kind of thing at a full-time level.
So I just want to ask you, in behind you, is that like an what I refer to, the kid's sander panting for gold type apparatus?
Okay,
or not?
You can see some stand-up screens there, and basically all the soil that is excavated off the area, usually in a 1 by 1 meter area, ideally broken down into a 50 centimeter square within that space, is sifted through the screens to recover any of the artifacts that are in there. Yeah, and then they're very carefully listed and tags put in with them and put in separate bags. Because we have to keep track of where everything comes from to be able to tell the story about what happened at the site.
Do you do anything with elementary school children?
Yeah, we run programs. One of the things I do, well, actually we've got a picture too of kids digs that have been going on in Glastonbury. Those are middle schoolers in that case. With elementary school kids, I often do what I call the birthday party dig, which is sort of a setup remnants of a birthday party with bits of wrapping paper and party remnants and things like that. But we lay it out so that there's patterning to it, so you can see where gifts were opened, where other things were happening. So this is a group of 7th graders from Glastonbury, the Smith Middle School class, and they have, I think, for 22 years been working with the Horton family that owns the farm there, right along the Connecticut River. And this is, by the way, not very far from the site we were just looking at. And they excavate on a real site, and they find little bits of quartz and little bits of chert on a late archaic site that has.
Oh, no, this
it's
is
just
fabulous.
basically sitting there, so they can do real archaeology.
So this family allows these children on their land.
Yeah,
well, that's very
it's a great program. Great
and
program.
that is really interesting because there's liability issues and people not, and that's also learning by doing. That's fabulous.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely hands-on, and they do a number of programs. So they switch off. We have 125 kids though come through that day to excavate. So they're broken into 4 groups. Some of them do spear throwing practice, and some of them I think learn about other plants in the area. So they kind of break them up, and each is given a kind of station for about 45 minutes.
Wow, Mike, can you go to the slide where they have all the people and the volunteers? Is that the particular one that you were mentioning? Because we only have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
All right, and I wanted to see that one. I don't know if you can find it.
Well, that's the field school.
That is the field school.
So 2 of the ladies who helped us out.
Okay, move along, Mike, because I know that. Okay, this is...
Oh, that's ground-penetrating radar work, which often happens if a...
Real radar?
Yeah, it's radar that blasts down into the ground and sends a reflective signal back up. I don't operate these machines. In this case, we had help from NRCS, a federal
Now, that reminds me of CSI and all the crime shows that I love, where they look for dead bodies. Is that accurate?
Well, you can't... What you see are little... You see blips back, and it'll tell you, for example, if there's a buried stone wall, or if there was a depression down in the ground that has been churned up that might, for example, have contained a casket. You don't see the casket, but what you see is ground disturbance, evidence of ground disturbance. And this is really often used on the edges of cemeteries when they're worried about unmarked burials.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and the next slide? Maybe we've hit most of it.
I think that might have been it.
All right, well then, here's one last one.
Okay, well that's just me all by myself, boy, working solo. Sometimes that happens too.
Well, I just want to comment on this because there's not much time left. Oh,
Slide that out of the way.
I didn't even notice it. Thank you. And that's my favorite too. Now, what is this exactly?
Okay, this is a marvelous Connecticut artifact. This is a steatite bowl or a soapstone bowl. These are lug handles that were on the end. This side has been busted out. It probably had a lug handle as well. So this raw material comes from the north central part of Connecticut, especially in the Bristol area. These go into production around 3,400 years ago and kind of fade out of common use after about 2,700 to 2,500 years ago, especially because pottery becomes more common. And pottery was a much simpler way to do your cooking. But basically, this is a cooking vessel. Or some kind of food processing vessel. Would have been really good, for example, for heating and preparing, roasting tiny seeds like Chenopodium, that's goosefoot. Produces itsy little tiny seeds, but if you gather 10,000 of them...
Goosefoot?
Yeah, quinoa. You might know quinoa,
Yes,
same as quinoa.
yes.
People here ate that by the thousandfold, okay? Very important, very nutritious plant food. Not the first thing you choose. If you have enough deer in the environment, you don't need to eat quinoa all day, but as the population grows, as it had by this time, people start resorting to these tiny
real.
foodstuffs. This is a real artifact. This is, again, one of them. Actually, it has a number here. So this is probably from the Bull collection. And so we could say what town it's from. There may no longer be a lot of direct evidence about which cornfield it was pulled out of, but it's likely this was found by a farmer 50 to 150 years ago.
We only have 2 minutes left, and if someone wanted to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
Okay, I would start with, you can just search Brian Jones, Office of State Archaeology, and there's a link right there to my email. Email is the best way to reach me. It'll also have my phone number. My desk phone is there. I'm not often at my desk because I'm running around the state. Luckily, I've been provided with a car.
They gave you a car.
Well, it's the university vehicle, but I'm allowed to use it. And in truth, 4 out of 5 days, I'm pretty much on the road.
I'm surprised you don't have a Jeep, or not a Jeep or a truck.
Well, I had the prior state archaeologist had a nice little truck, but we went greener, and so I've got what is it? It's the C-Max, the Ford C-Max, a nice hybrid vehicle. So
very, very good, but a truck sound,
It's okay. Most of the time, I'm simply on the highway. So
they can contact you just by Googling and searching your
Google
name.
my name, Brian Jones, State Archaeology, and if you have any questions, that's what I'm there for. I'm here to kind of help you sort out things that you might find and help determine if they're important and need to be documented.
Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful show. I've been personally interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you have any questions and if you forget his name, just contact me at classroomconnections365.com or jmdteach@comcast.net, and I'll pass them along to Brian. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I so appreciate it.
You're very welcome.